Hi, I'm Melissa Lee from California.
Hi, and I'm Shelley, North and South Carolina. How are you?
Good, Shelley. Today we're going to talk about landscape lighting as we're getting into the spring. This is becoming something that is important, and it's important for people to update and make sure that everything is working properly as people get outside a little bit more. Um, Landscape lighting is one of those things that can be sometimes overlooked, but I know in the commercial side, it's one of the most important aspects. And can you talk about why it's so important on the commercial side to include and incorporate landscape lighting into the main part of the project?
Well, the landscape lighting would also envelop like your bollards and, around the surface. It's safety. It's also so you can see the business at night. And yeah, mostly for safety reasons and first impressions on that. So there's a lot of reasons, egress and all that, they stay on all the time.
That makes sense. And I think we're talking about both spaces, commercial and residential. And I think it's also a safety feature. It's becoming a safety and security feature in residential too, as we evolve in the types of landscape lighting that we're able to offer, that lighting, that the lighting industry is able to offer to people. We've had a lot of advances in that as well. It makes it easier to light spaces and be able to control the spaces that you like. So we're going to talk a little bit about the types of landscape lighting
Mhm.
that people will encounter in both in commercial spaces and in residential. There are basically three categories. There's path lighting, which includes bollards, and we'll talk about that. There's different styles of path lighting, and it can be anything from something that's very unobtrusive to something that's very commercial and gives out a lot of light. There's also deck lighting. This is really important for any kind of restaurant or any kind of outdoor space, hotels where people gather. It's really important for them to be able to see and to be able to see changes in the plenums and stairs. And finally is accent lighting, and this is the kind of lighting that people will use, and companies will use to highlight trees, shrubbery, flowers, vines, and the buildings themselves. And you can layer a building if you're using the correct accent lighting. So there are a lot of different layers that go into it. Um, so you need a mix of these actually to make it work. And I'm going to start with path lighting, and we'll talk a little bit about path lighting and the types of materials that you usually see in path lighting. So path lighting can be any kind of aluminum. It can be a solid aluminum. It can be a composite, which is they're sort of impervious to weather. Some of the composites have almost like a marine grade durability where they're impervious to weather. People will also use brass and copper plated brass and cast brass in these designs for bollards and for path light. It's very unusual to see it's not usual to see cast aluminum in path lighting or in any kind of outdoor lighting because cast aluminum just simply doesn't hold up very well to the elements. And these lights have to be outside, and they're enduring weather, different types of weather all year round. Uh, there are different voltages for path lighting for actually all outdoor lighting and all landscape lighting. There's 12 volt and 120 volt, and there are differences between them. We can talk about that a little bit, but I know that in the residential space, 12 volt is really favorable because you don't have to dig trenches, you don't have to put um, the wire in conduit. Because it's 12 volt, I'll say safer to play with for DIY or for a smaller job, and you don't have to bury the cable, so it's not as big of a job. With that said, you don't have as many lamping options, and you do have light loss. You do have a certain amount of light loss in 12 volt, even with LED. I know 120 is different. Can you speak about 120 volt outdoor landscape lighting? Do you have any experience with that?
I would say that most of my experience has been more in the pathway type lighting. And that's nice because literally you can do more of a battery backup. Sometimes it's I'm sure you can do that with low voltage too, but you can have that within the bollard or without. And 120 volt actually can get you more wattage. A lot of times you just need it brighter, depending on if you're grazing up a building. Sometimes you need a lot more light going up. Or also, let's see, I keep saying but that, I mean, a 120 volts is it's gonna vary between 120 volt, 277 volt, but it's mostly going to be because you're not, um, I guess, inhibited by a driver or by gauge as much, but also you get more light, more lumens, further space, and you can light the space better. Not better, but you're just dealing with larger spaces. Yes.
Right, right. And maybe more light output usually, and then you don't have the light loss, I think, to worry about that you sometimes have in 12 volt.
It can
Um,
be less maintenance in some ways, in that way too.
right. And there's arguments for both, but you know, for less maintenance in 12 volt, and there's also incidents for less maintenance in 120 volt. Depends on the project. And um but we see mostly in residential people using 12 volt. They just use it all the way across the whole system. And I see more in commercial 120. Sometimes they'll use 12 volt if they have to in step and in deck light. Sometimes those what they want only comes in low voltage. So sometimes they'll do a mix. Um, the second lighting category is, and I'll address this because we just talked about, is deck lighting. Something that because of linear lighting and linear LED lighting, we've expanded this category greatly. We used to have, a long time ago in the lighting industry, we had a type of light called rope light, and everyone used rope light. It was lighting encased in kind of a plastic, and it looked like a rope, and you could go long lengths with this and different colors. And we didn't really have a replacement for that until we had linear, outdoor linear LED. And so we do have, a lot of manufacturers have that now, and it's very helpful for stairs and areas where there's a curvature in the design, and you can bend this linear light. That is part of deck lighting. Deck lighting also includes what we would call step lights. So these are small lights that have a direction. And sometimes they're multi-directional. Sometimes they look like a brick, a brick or a small brick. They have kind of standard sizes. They have grills on them. They have louvers on them, so you don't stare directly into them. And then there's deck lighting too on the sides. Sometimes they're small and you can light stairs with these type of deck lights. And sometimes they have a hood and they shine down. Sometimes they'll shine out. It depends on the situation and the amount of light that's needed and where the light is needed. And then we also have lights that are hung for deck lighting, like track lighting and other lights that affix to ceiling areas or arboretums and things that can be directional in lighting. I think I've got all the examples. Shelley, am I missing anything with tech lights?
No, no, I think that's good. I mean,
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of use of tape lighting these days.
A lot of, we are using more and more of the encased linear tape, what we call tape lighting now, that's encased. Yes, because it is low voltage. Sometimes it's 24 volt, sometimes it's 12 volt, but it makes it easier to span a lot of space. And especially when you have a large area and you need another layer of light. It can't, I think that that lighting, it's hard to use on its own for everything, but you can use it as a layer for sure of light that can enhance the area and can give you more light to seek out different levels of space and stairs. And if you're having to go from one area of a deck to another, you'll be able to see better if you have a couple of layers, and that includes the linear. And then the accent lighting, these are the bullet lights. This is a hard category because it's very hard to know how things are going to grow unless you're an expert. And in the commercial space, I know there are usually the landscape architects we've talked about. architects and lighting designers and other types of design professionals to figure out that space and how something that's new, maybe something that's planted that's new, that's a tree, how is that going to grow over time, and how are you going to adjust your lighting and account for possible adds to the lighting as things change in the space, as things grow. And the accent lights are also what we use a lot of times to highlight the buildings too. So these are usually like powerful bullet lights. They have lots of lumens, thousands of lumens of output. Sometimes they have a lot of different lenses on them. Sometimes they have several different wattages on them, so you can change the wattage as your foliage grows to accommodate that. But these are the big guns, and these are the ones that I think are the hardest for people to figure out what to use and where to use it and how much light to use, and then the materials. So like the other landscape lighting, like the path lights and also deck lights, these come in a variety of materials, including that, I'll call it that impervious marine grade composite, also brass, copper plated brass, cast brass. We see steel, sometimes solid steel and other types of aluminum, but we usually, again, don't see cast aluminum for these kinds of fixtures. Yeah, they just don't work very well. They don't have endurance. But in the path light, in the accent light, we also include well lights, and these can sit in the ground and they can also be directional. They can put out a lot of light, and you can also direct them you can use a shield on them to direct them in certain areas so they're not just sticking up and sort of blinding you. In the accent lighting, we have usually people have options for like a hexagon louver to cut glare. There are lenses you can put in landscape lighting to change the effect of landscape lighting, to make it more dramatic or to cut direct light. And one of the things we always worry about with landscape lighting, or I think everybody worries about, is there some point where a human is going to encounter a light directly in their eye? And there's a lot of new designs and a lot of ways to avoid this, but you really need a professional when you're, especially in commercial, when you're doing something in commercial, because you want to avoid people being blinded literally by the light.
Light leaks, yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you've had experience with that ever on jobs, or do your landscape architects and architects on the commercial side take care of that ahead of time? And how does that
No,
look?
I think a lot of things are all taken care of ahead of time. I mean, if we're gonna talk about kind of like on the commercial side of it, landscape lighting is such a huge deal. I'm just gonna get like churches. Churches are usually lit in certain ways with the steeple, and then you've got your flag poles, and so there's just a lot of things that take place differently in that side. But the residential side is a lot of fun too. I mean, low voltage is great for the reason that if you want to add, you can add to it. I do see a lot of people going 24 volt now because you can go a longer distance
Right.
without, when we talk about gauge of wire, that is the gauge that goes from the driver to the light fixture. So the further that the light fixture is out from the driver, you've got your landscaper or whoever's installing it needs to be aware of what gauge by the distance. And there is a chart for that. Most manufacturers have it too. So
Right.
but it's nice because you can start off kind of small on that and then add. You're
Right.
not really isolated on the low voltage side. You can add to it. And I like it. I think it's really fun at night. Most people will offer this as a mock-up, at least, if it's an existing project that you're adding to, is some type of mock-up is nice.
Right. Right. And I do think that adding on, especially with the advent of LED, and in the old days, you had a transformer, we would call a transformer, and it would be, 300 watts, 900 watts. You would need several of these to accommodate a larger home, because you would run out of a wattage pretty quickly. With the old style lights, where the wattage was, 25 watts a fixture, pretty soon you'd have 6, 8 fixtures on there and you were finished. Now,
Sure.
because of LED, the use wattage, the input wattage is, a couple of watts, sometimes 5 watts, sometimes 10, but you really would never exceed maybe like 14 watts ever. And that's a really powerful landscape light that's lighting a building. So it is nice to be able to add on and to be able to increase the size of your transformer or driver, or account for that at the beginning of the project so that you're able to add on later. Because it is really important to be able to change things and not have it a fixed system where you can't enhance it later on, because as we know, trees grow, trees fall, the building, maybe the material of the building changes, you add a deck. You know, it happens in residential and commercial, and you need to be able to accommodate that and allow for that. And I think too, this on the security side of things and the safety side of things, you mentioned church, and this is one of the areas where the quality of the light and the quality of the manufacturer becomes really important, because you need to work with somebody who has a warranty on their landscape lighting, a warranty on their LED or whatever the source of the light is for the landscape lighting. Because if something ever does happen, and it's, for example, at a church, it's very difficult in these commercial spaces. There are people who have health challenges and walking challenges, and they have to be able to see to get into these spaces. And we start there with these commercial spaces. It's a liability if a commercial space doesn't have adequate lighting and somebody falls, for example. It could be a big problem. It could be a lawsuit, you know, there could be all kinds of outcomes that are not good for the owner of the building. When that translates into residential, we do want to have security and safety too, because as a homeowner, you don't want somebody falling on the way to your house. You don't want to have your house be a space where somebody who wants to, an interloper, can get in and be unseen because there's no lighting. So and now that we can program our lights, we can tell our lights when we get in our car to turn on our landscape lights outside. It becomes even more of a security and a safety feature, so that when we arrive home, there's lighting that's on, or when it's dusk comes, there's lighting that's on, you know, automatically.
Mhm.
And it makes us feel like the home or the space is safer because we can see other things in the space, and other people and can see us in the space. And that's just a fundamental part of the safety and security aspect of this kind of lighting. And in landscape too, there are design differences. You know, some people there are go-tos for people. And I know you have very specific feelings about the types of landscape light that you like to use, or that you're drawn to. Can you talk about that a little bit? What kinds you favor?
So we were talking about this earlier. Well, first of all, we go back to, I think the landscape lighting is the first impression of any space. So when you're pulling to someone's house, if you think about it in your subconscious, there's something that makes you notice one house over another. And it's not to be the Taj Mahal, but just it's lit nicely. You know, a lot of people will light the holidays different than they will light year round, you know, so it's kind of like those things are taken into. But I love the bullet lights. I love well lights. I think that in the landscape lighting, if there's columns on the front of the house, I'd love for there to be the columns to be dramatically lit with a linear lens, not just a spot. These are things that I think about. And I'd love to light from the trees down. So that they're not all on there. And that's actually what I have at my house. But you have to take into consideration when you do that the tree grows. So we'll get into that in another subject, in another podcast, I know, but these are the type of things that I take in consideration. It's the front door, it's your first impression. You don't have to have the whole house and lit exactly at the same levels. But, you know, I think roof lines are sometimes created on purpose. And it's nice to accent, you know, the roof lines depending on what type of style it is, you know. So
Right.
so
Right.
the bullet's my favorite, and then well lights. And then I guess for pool and deck areas, tape lighting.
I think tape lighting is a great response to anything where it's going to get wet, like a pool area too. And I do think that like mentioned earlier, the accent lighting is often the most challenging. Some people like to light below a tree and highlight a tree, especially if it's small. I know that there are landscape architects who want to get into the tree and light different dimensions of the same tree. There might be several lights in one tree. If it's a very large, like 100-foot tree, like what we have in our area, we have these redwood trees that are huge. And if you want to get the scale of that, it's a literally a climb up to get in there to light these areas, sufficiently. But I do think that it is a first impression. And funnily enough, our house that is the last thing that we're dealing with, is the landscape lighting. It will be dramatic and it will be great, but it's the last thing that we're getting to. And sometimes that's the case where you have a house, especially when you have weather that's inhibiting your ability to go out there and lay things out. There's a better times of the year to do it, of course, which we're getting into that time of year, which is very exciting. But I also really like the accent lights. I really like wall lights. I am very particular about path lighting, and I don't like. We'll talk about this also in another episode, but I see a lot of applications where it looks like a landing strip. And you really don't want that from any angle, for it to look like the plane is coming into land or that it is the Taj Mahal. And I think it's okay to use, we'll talk about a little bit, the different Kelvin temperatures that we find usually in landscape. There are a lot of different options, especially in the commercial space. But now that we have LED, usually we stick to that. Some people opt for 2,700, some opt for 3,000, some opt for like 3,500 or a higher color temperature just to get brightness in some spaces. And it's okay, I think, to mix this is one area where color temperature mixture, I think, is okay, because there are going to be areas where you don't need as much contrast or definition, and you can go to a warmer Kelvin temperature where you're just trying to have an effused area versus where you really need contrast on a building. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think this is one of those areas where it's okay to break the rules a little bit and have maybe different color temperatures in different areas of the outdoor space, the space that's
I don't think I know enough about that to comment on it, really. I mean, I see where there are standard Kelvins used in different places, but so I can't say that I've actually witnessed it, and I can see where that would probably come into play. Yes, but I can't say I know enough about it. But it's interesting that you're saying the grazing, because we were talking about always using an expert, and I think it's so true, because you were talking about trees earlier, because it's important to know, like you said, the bark of the tree, how the tree grows, if you're going to graze up or graze down on something like that. And then on materials, I do believe in landscape lighting, you can get what you pay for. I think it's super duper important that, if it's something you're changing all the time, maybe that doesn't matter. But if it is a solid, brass, and it has a suction to it, because you have to worry about water leaks. If it's an inferior product, that's the number one thing you're going to have, is that water leak if the suction's not on there correctly. So when picking it out, I think that sometimes splurging is not a bad thing on that. I think quality is a big deal.
I agree. Yes.
Maintenance issues.
Yes, there's a huge failure rate of landscape lights. And I'm going to bring up one more type of landscape light that we didn't mention before, and maybe for a reason, is solar lighting. And this is something that a lot of you see a lot online, you see a lot in some of the bigger stores, solar landscape lighting. It is a thing, but it's something that has a very high perceived failure rate, because if they're not cooperating properly, they're usually not a very, very, I don't know very many high end or great quality. Not saying that they're not out there, but the ones that you find in any, kind of big store environment, they don't have the suction. They probably aren't airtight. They probably don't have the best light source, so that even in
Right.
solar, you are going to encounter lights that aren't going to work. And if you put them in the wrong place, they're not going to work. And so there's this, it seems like they're all failing because there's not a good standard system for higher end solar lighting to work. So we tend not, this is something that we tend not to see in high-end residential homes or commercial spaces where it's important, like where there needs to be light. You can't
I think
really,
that's I
yeah.
think there are a few good solar light companies out there. I don't think they're mass produced yet. That's just my theory. But I think they're best used if you need to add lighting far away from your space. You can put that out there really easily. And then also at the coast, these docks, they can sit on the posts of the docks and pull it out there. Of course, they have other lights too, but I'm seeing that used quite a bit because it's almost expendable anyways because of salt.
Right, they're not gonna have a lot of longevity, I guess, in the end, depending on what the product is made of. And I think solar lighting is interesting, and we're probably going to talk about it in another podcast later on, but it's something that isn't, you're right. I mean, I don't, the ones that are mass produced are probably not the ones that you would want to trust to be the sole source of lighting in a space. But it is something that, as we move towards sustainability and awareness, I get asked about solar lighting, have been asked about it a lot in the past, and it's an interesting topic.
I think there are other countries that are using it more frequently than we are.
I think so too. And maybe there'll be an evolution of it, and it will be something that works in many cases. But the standards now are the 12 volts, coming the 24 volt, especially in the linear, and the 120, 220 volt systems that we know we can rely on. We know that we have lamping for. And as we phase out of our traditional halogen lamping and other types of lamping to go into LED, we're going to just be able to expand on this category because it's a growing category, growing literally and also growing in popularity. I think that people dwelling in their spaces over the last few years have been acutely aware of deficiencies, if there are deficiencies outside the home or outside the space. And now that things are opening back up again in a major way and people are traveling, they are going to want to use, yes, and they're going to want to use these outdoor spaces. And they're going to want to make sure that the lighting is great, adequate, dramatic, whatever they're trying to attain. They want to be able to do that in the outdoor lighting as well as the indoor. So we're going to see a lot more of this as time goes on, as the entertaining spaces get bigger and more outdoor, and we spend more time in our spaces and outdoor and aware of the safety, security, and the beauty of landscape lighting in the space. So until next time, we are going to have a very esteemed landscape architect joining us on the podcast soon, and world renowned, and we're very excited about this. And we have more coming, more podcasts coming about all different kinds of things in the future. And if there's anything that you guys want to hear about and you want us to discuss, leave a comment under the link. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into our podcast, Lightwaves, a deep dive into all things lighting with a side of design. If we've left you wanting more, please hit the subscribe button, or you can follow us on any of your favorite social or podcast platforms. Thanks again.